Sometimes all you need is 20 seconds of insane courage, just literally 20 seconds of just embarrassing bravery. And I promise you, something great will come of it. I'm Jessica Denson, and this is Lights On. Shout out to those sending me these quotes to open the show with, and Benjamin Mee, who wrote that one. I'll leave it up to you to look up where that comes from. But we have another excellent show for you today, jam-packed with content and motivation, calls to action. As you know, I have been persistently covering the issue of Trump's enduring disqualification from serving office under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. I have an excellent guest here today to join me on that subject and others. Glenn Kirschner is joining me. And from what I understand, he has not discussed the issue of Section 3 in a long time, but he has things that you absolutely want to hear about it today. So definitely stick around. We had an excellent conversation. I am going to ask you, if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel. As you know, I branched off a few weeks ago independently from Meidastouch. And from what I've heard and from what I can see out there, I think I am one of the only, if not the only, independent media channel hammering this issue of the 14th Amendment. So I know there's a movement out there. I hear from all of you. I am inundated with feedback and support, and it's so beautiful. So please help me grow and expand and amplify the messages that I and we are putting out here together with the scholars that I've shared with you, with the experts on how we can keep this illegal presidency from happening, not mitigating the damage of a Russian-installed president into the United States of America to destroy it all, who has zero allegiance to the Constitution, but actually before that happens, taking the steps that are within our power to take to prevent that illegal presidency from coming to fruition. I am laser focused, as you know, on the practical pathway that we have to do that. And I also want to ask you, please, 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 to stay tuned to the end of this episode. I have a special request for you on how you can help me. As I mentioned, I have gotten so many messages and suggestions on what action we can take. So please, please, please stay tuned to the end. I'm going to give you my thoughts, and I have a very important request of you. So just before we get into this conversation with Glenn and more into the 14th Amendment, I'm also at the end going to clarify some more misinformation that is coming out from Meidastouch in regards to the 14th Amendment. It's just unbelievable that people would be putting false information from lawyers, people who should know these things, would be giving you misinformation, but they are. You have pointed me to where they are, so I'm definitely going to correct that and some other feedback about Meidastouch at the end. But before we do that, because the title of this show is Lights On, and Glenn and I have such a great conversation about points of light that we can focus on right now. I want to point out one story that I really appreciated from this week, and this is kind of, we'll do a compare and contrast. This is kind of like the tale of two types of judges. There is one story that came out this week, which was about a judge, U.S. District Judge Michael Posner. I don't know if you heard about this, but this judge had wrote an essay that called Justice Samuel Alito's hanging of the flag outside of his house improper and dumb. Okay, improper and dumb. Now, we know that we are dealing with a supremely corrupt Supreme Court, a Supreme Court where justices are bought and paid for, where they are compromised, where they have refused to recuse themselves from cases where they have a complete conflict of interest. If you don't remember the situation with Alito, he was hanging a flag outside of his house that was a symbol of sympathy with insurrectionists in 2020, a Stop the Steal flag, right on theme with what we're talking about today and why Donald Trump remains disqualified. And this U.S. District Judge wrote a essay that called that hanging of the flag improper and dumb. So in response to this, there is this group called the Article 3 Project. Now, this is one of these pseudo-legal groups run by a Trump ally named Mike Davis. Trump ally, Trump lawyer named Mike Davis. Article 3 Project. This is the same guy, Mike Davis, who has put out explicit threats against people like Letitia James. He is a very hostile and retributive type of individual. And he filed a complaint against Michael Posner for this essay. And in response, another judge, actually an appointee of President Obama, Judge Diaz, ordered that Judge Posner apologize and that he had ran afoul of a code of conduct for U.S. judges, which is, I mean, the hypocrisy here, that a district judge would be called out for calling this hanging of this flag improper, which it clearly was, where Alito did not recuse himself from those January 6 cases, where this court literally granted Donald Trump immunity for committing crimes. And the crimes in question were in relation to his attempt to stay in power against the will of the people. And Alito was flying a flag upside down. And that is just one. We're not even touching on Thomas and all of the judges. But this man, Michael Posner, for this one essay where he called that improper, he was reprimanded. He was reprimanded. He was made to issue an apology. And he did that after this complaint was filed by this very aggressive and threatening group run by Mike Davis. So now I'm going to give you the flip side, the bright side of what some really good things that are going on with judges. And these judges, by the way, are also under attack by Mike Davis and the Article 3 Project. Now, the other story is that judges are unretiring. I don't know if you heard about this week, but the third judge decided that he was not going to step down in light of knowing that his replacement would not be confirmed in this Senate. If you remember, there was a real push to get as many Biden judges confirmed before Joe Biden leaves office as possible. Unfortunately, I'm saying unfortunately because I wish the number was higher. They came to a deal in the Senate that about a dozen of those judges that Biden wanted to get through would be confirmed. I think their goal was somewhere maybe in the 30 range, but they struck a deal to confirm about 12. When this happened, some of these judges that had decided to retire and knew that their replacements were not going to be confirmed, they backtracked on that retirement. One of them is Fourth Circuit Judge James Wynn. He was an appointee of Barack Obama, and he told the White House late last week that he was reversing his plans to take senior status. And that makes him, Judge James Wynn, the third. The other two are U.S. District Judges Algernon Marbley and Max Coburn. And the Republicans have literally had the audacity, to suggest that these are brazenly partisan decisions from a Republican body, in the Senate in particular, Mitch McConnell, who has stacked this court with partisan ideologues to strip back people's rights and empower a monarch, literally try to rewrite our Constitution illegally and empower the actions of a lawless monarch. And they have also been subject to attacks and complaints from this Article 3 project. So keep an eye on that. Please join me in supporting and thanking these judges for standing up for what they understand is the danger coming ahead and not wanting to contribute to the destruction that can be done by judges that Donald Trump appoints, like Eileen Cannon and many others. I will note that there have been judges in these past years that even were appointed by Donald Trump who have had the courage to rule against him. So not all are in the Eileen Cannon camp, but at least we know that the ones that are not appointed by him will adhere to the rule of law and not adhere to loyalty to Donald Trump. So thank you to those judges for doing that. I wanted to just take a good chunk of time and shed light on those patriotic actions from them. So, as I promised, I have a lot more content. I'm going to give you your comments at the end of the show, as I usually do. I want to shed light on one more thing in the line of what Democrats in power can be doing right now. Courageous action that they need to be taking. And actually, you know what? Let me share some of those comments from you guys right now, because they apply so much to what needs to be done by Democratic lawmakers in power. Here's one. It says, I've heard so many people say we have to fight, stay in the fight, but I'm not seeing the actions from the people who say these words. Here's another one. I need my Democratic representatives to stop worrying about how their actions will be interpreted by the GOP. They need to just do the right thing. I'm so frustrated and have been for decades watching the Democrats cower in the corner. Please, please, we need courage now more than ever. And just in regards to my coverage and our coverage of Section 3 matter in particular, someone said to me, you're doing exactly what every damn media person on the left should be doing. Thank you. And we'll kind of bring that full circle at the end with my comments about Meidastouch. But as far as what Democrats could be doing, I was kind of a little bit surprised, but gladly surprised by a bill that was raised by Democrats this week in the Senate. 3 Democratic senators unveiled a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College system. This was done by Brian Shates of Hawaii, Dick Durbin, and Peter Welch. They said it's time to restore democracy by allowing for the direct election of presidents through the popular vote alone. Yeah, no kidding. It's also time to restore democracy by not allowing a constitutionally disqualified man from assuming the presidency. So I would call on these same senators, Shates, Durbin, Welch, so many senators who I have seen do courageous things, Bernie Sanders, Mitt Romney. I could go on and on. There are so many. If you go back and watch the January 6th, really morning of January 7th, speeches from the floor of Congress, the clarity that these members had then, they need to have it now. And they need to employ that same courage to this moment and do what is right for our Constitution now. We cannot wait to let this man take power. When that happens, all bets are off. We must do it now in this precious window of time. All of the videos I've been putting out on Lights On have been outlining those specific steps that we can take. So I encourage you to go back and watch those videos. I will link to them at the end of this show. But I'm very glad to be bringing to you this interview I had with Glenn Kirschner, and so glad that he is on board for enforcement of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Listen to my conversation on that issue and many others with Glenn. Please join me in welcoming Glenn Kirschner, former federal prosecutor and host of Justice Matters. Got to tell you, Glenn, been wanting to have you on Lights On for so long. Such a pleasure to finally have you here with me.
I'm glad to be on with you.
Now, we are definitely going to dive into the 14th Amendment. Gracie behind me is here to listen. She wants to hear all about it. But before we get to that, I want to start with you. As we're pressing record, this is probably going to air on Friday, but we just got news that Fani Willis was removed from the Georgia case. This is, of course, the sprawling RICO case that was derailed by allegations that she had an improper relationship with her colleague, Nathan Wade. She has signaled that she's going to appeal this to the Georgia Supreme Court, but it is yet another legitimate attempt to hold Donald Trump and his corrupt and criminal allies to account. And this case appears to be derailed right now. Can I just have your thoughts off the bat on this?
Yeah, the whole notion of accountability, holding what I call the ruling class criminals accountable for their crimes, you know, people of power and influence, connection, it seems to be taking a hit. The rule of law seems to be taking a hit these days over and over and over again. There are a couple of points of light amidst this Trump-induced darkness when it comes to the Georgia State RICO prosecution that District Attorney Fani Willis brought and has been pursuing appropriately aggressively against Trump and all of his co-conspirators down there. So as you say, Jessica, there was just a ruling handed down by the Georgia State Court of Appeals. Now, importantly, it was a split decision. It was not unanimous. It was decided by a 3-judge panel. 2 of the judges decided that even though there was no actual conflict or actual impropriety, they said, well, the appearance of conflict or impropriety is enough, in our opinion, to have her removed from the case. But importantly, and this is why we always read the dissent, the dissenting judge had a very different impression. And I think this is going to be important moving forward through the appeals process, because this one is far from over. Here is what Judge Land, Benjamin Land, said. I'm just going to read about a sentence or two. He said that for the last 43 years, our appellate courts have held that an appearance of impropriety or conflict without an actual conflict provides no basis for the reversal of the trial court's denial of the motion to disqualify. He goes on to say, we, the appellate court, have no authority to reverse the trial court's denial of the motion to disqualify. None, period. That is a direct quote. He doesn't believe the Georgia Court of Appeals even had the lawful authority to do what it just did. So where does that leave us? Well, we can expect a couple of things moving forward. One, I have to believe District Attorney Fani Willis's office will appeal this to the full Georgia State Court of Appeals, what we call an en banc request, that the full court hear it. And after that, I think regardless of who wins or who loses, it will end up in the Georgia State Supreme Court. And it wouldn't surprise me if they reversed and they said, listen, because the law in Georgia doesn't really allow us to kick a district attorney off the case unless there's an actual conflict, not just an appearance of conflict, we think the appeals court may have stepped a toe over the line down in Georgia. So there is still a lot to come. Importantly, even this ruling, the 2-to-1 split, said, well, one way or another, the case can continue. The prosecution can continue, but it has to be assigned to a new Georgia County prosecutor's office. So this one looks bad, it looks ominous, and it looks dark, but it ain't over. And there are some points of light that we can grab hold of, and hopefully eventually the light will pierce through the darkness.
I appreciate you bringing the light theme to Lights On. I always am trying to do that. And I absolutely think that one other aspect of light that we can look to is the ruling from Justice Merchan in New York, where he refused to dismiss Donald Trump's 34 felony counts based on the obscene Supreme Court presidential immunity ruling. He said this has no bearing on this case. What were your thoughts when you saw that, Glenn?
Yeah, he got that exactly right, because Donald Trump's crimes in New York, 34 felony crimes, according to a jury of his peers, he committed those 34 felony crimes. He was found guilty. He committed those crimes, falsifying business records to cover up hush money payments. Why? All to gain unfair advantage in a presidential election. These are really consequential and serious crimes, just mere falsification of business records. So, and Judge Merchan got it exactly right. He said, listen, the Supreme Court has said that a criminal president might have immunity for core constitutional functions or official presidential acts. These were neither. This was private conduct. Largely, these crimes were committed while Donald Trump was a candidate for office, so he doesn't even get presidential immunity. And even as he was writing reimbursement checks to Michael Cohen, his former attorney, who was the one who actually paid Stormy Daniels the $130,000 of hush money to keep her quiet, he was writing those checks out of the Oval Office after he was sworn in as president. But that is not the official conduct of a president, reimbursing your attorney and fixer for these dirty hush money payments. So Judge Merchan got it right. He said, no presidential immunity for you. Now, that doesn't end the matter because of, and let me just add, because I think you rightly, Jessica, said that this is a horrific Supreme Court opinion, giving a president absolute immunity to commit all the crimes he wants against the American people without ever being held accountable for those crimes. I always quote one of our preeminent constitutional scholars, Akil Reed Amar, professor at Yale, who said, and I can pretty much quote him verbatim, in that presidential immunity ruling, the Supreme Court declared that the Constitution is unconstitutional. That's actually an abuse of discretion by the Supreme Court justices, the 6 of them who joined that majority opinion. That's something we are going to need to fix moving forward. But as of right now, the status of the New York case, Judge Marchand has one more ruling to make, and that is whether, because he's now been elected president, he has to dismiss the 34 guilty verdicts against Donald Trump. He doesn't. And then the only question really becomes, does Judge Marchand immediately move to sentencing and sentence Donald Trump probably to probation, which would be an injustice, but it may be all that Judge Marchand is left with, because I don't think he's going to order the president-elect to a lengthy term of incarceration, even though Donald Trump richly deserves it for the crimes he committed. But the other thing he can do, and I hope he is seriously considering doing this, just pause the case, suspend it, stay it, so that he can sentence Donald Trump the day he leaves office and his temporary immunity as a sitting president evaporates. It is at an end. And that's when Judge Marchand will be able to sentence Donald Trump to the prison term he so richly deserves.
He absolutely deserves it, and the people deserve it. I come back to this theme, like, this is not some retribution vengeance tour. This is justice and healing for the American people. And that's what people are so sick of. And why I literally have people writing into my show, Glenn. I'm going to tell you, and I'm sure you get similar messages. And I have been covering, and I want to kind of segue into this subject in a minute here, the actions we need to take now before Trump takes office. And he's constitutionally disqualified from taking that office. And I have been honing in on this fact again and again. And I've literally gotten messages, Glenn, that if people have told me that they were feeling like they wanted to end their own life because of the situation that we're facing. And I've gotten multiple messages like this. And when you think of January 6th and how many Capitol police officers and metropolitan police officers were injured and their lives altered that day, and then in the aftermath, several of them took their own lives. And in recent times, more of them have. To think that we are letting this man pass through the gates, steamroll our Constitution, install a government of Russian assets and people who have published enemies lists and zero allegiance to the Constitution, and we're not doing anything to stop it, it's just not okay. And people literally are writing to me like, I'm looking for a reason to live. Give me a reason to live. And so I wasn't necessarily thinking of that when I started reporting on the 14th Amendment, but for God's sakes, Glenn, we have a 14th Amendment, Section 3, that says an insurrectionist cannot hold office. He cannot hold office, and that disability cannot be removed without a 2/3 vote of both houses of Congress. And we have a recourse. We have a recourse to keep this illegal president from assuming power and destroying all of the blood, sweat, tears, and sacrifice that have gone into upholding this republic. Should we not do something to uphold our Constitution in this moment?
Yeah, I vote for just applying the plain text, the express language of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, because that actually holds the solution to our problem. But let me first say to the people who are, despondent and depressed and anxiety ridden, and, I hope people aren't, considering such drastic measures as just sort of checking out because they feel like things are so bad and there is no hope. This is going to sound trite, but I want to start with it. It's always darkest before the dawn. And it has never been darker for us, for folks who have been around for 50, 60, I'm not putting you in my category, 60 plus years. This is probably the darkest point in my lifetime as an American, a proud American. But the light will come again. It won't be soon and it won't be easy, but I know what you do. One of the things I do every single day here at Justice Matters is I focus on the points of light and the optimism, the legitimate points of light and optimism, not hopium and not Pollyanna, cure-alls. No, there's legitimate hope and light and optimism out there. And maybe we'll have a follow-up conversation regarding where I personally see those points of light, having been a practitioner in the criminal courts of Washington, D.C. for decades as a federal prosecutor. But moving beyond that to your question about the 14th Amendment, I can read English. I may be a gutter kid from Jersey, but I can read the plain text of Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. Anybody who takes an oath of allegiance to the Constitution, as Donald Trump did, who thereafter engages in insurrection or gives aid and comfort to those who do, is disqualified. You are disqualified, period. The Constitution has disqualified you, just as sure as if you were 34 years old and you were trying to run for office, or if you weren't a natural born citizen and you were trying to run for office. This isn't our opinion, Jessica. This is the Constitution. So he is disqualified as we sit here. And importantly, we'll get to how he can, again, regain qualification. You've already mentioned it, but is an adjudicated insurrectionist. There was a trial in Colorado at which Donald Trump was represented, and the trial court judge ruled that he engaged in insurrection. And the Supreme Court of Colorado affirmed that ruling, saying, you're darn right, Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. He's an adjudicated insurrectionist. The Supreme Court did not wipe away that ruling when they issued their ridiculous opinion, dancing around the expressed language, those textualists did, to try to get him out from under the disqualification of the 14th Amendment. And in substance, here's what they ruled. They said, listen, okay, he's been adjudicated an insurrectionist. The 14th Amendment says what it says, but it doesn't say that his name can't appear on a primary ballot in the state. I actually agree with that. Why? Because it doesn't say in the 14th Amendment that somebody's name can't be on a ballot in a presidential primary. What it does say is he can't be sworn in and hold office. He is disqualified. The only way he can become qualified again is if 2/3 of the House and the Senate vote to remove the disqualification. And they have every opportunity to hold that vote. And I damn sure hope they do on or around January 6th. I have great confidence in many of the Democrats who are sitting members of Congress, constitutional scholars like Jamie Raskin and so many others. And I am hopeful we're going to be hearing a lot more about the constitutional need to hold that vote on or around January 6th, certainly well before Donald Trump is sworn in on January 20th, to see if that disqualification can be removed by the constitutionally required vote of Congress.
Well, if it doesn't, I mean, this is really, and I've been on my shows, Glenn, I've been like a one-note instrument hammering this issue of the 14th Amendment. And I've had multiple shows describing different avenues that we can take. One of them, or a couple of them, have focused on the raising of an amnesty bill well before January 6th. This is something Senate Democrats could do because they still have control of that body. And by simply raising the amnesty bill, even if it fails, any level of failure is a success because it gets back to the status quo, which is status insurrectionist. But without that, which is not necessary, as you said, these lawmakers have a responsibility to vote in accordance with the Constitution. And I've had I've gone through these paths that Congress may take and that Congress is frankly obligated to take. I had a constitutional law professor on yesterday. I've gone through this with columnists. I've cited William Bowden, Michael Paulson, as you know, who are the preeminent scholars who brought Section 3 to the forefront. But a lot of people have asked me, and I want to get your thoughts on this. Is there any action that could be taken by citizens to bring a class action, to bring an injunctive action, to either sue members of Congress, to force them to not violate their oaths, to possibly bring an injunctive action to keep him from being sworn in? Is there anything that we the people could do in the courts to make sure that Section 3 is enforced?
Yeah, I'm going to give you the most honest and candid answer I can. I don't know. And the reason I say that is because I will never pretend to be an expert or even experienced in some area of law in which I have never practiced. I was a federal prosecutor my whole life, and that was as an Army JAG prosecutor, and then for 24 years as a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice. And I've tried cases military and civilian. I've tried cases federal, state, and local. I've handled criminal appeals in local court, in the federal courts. I've never brought a class action lawsuit. That is a civil matter. And
Yeah.
goodness knows, I don't pretend to know exactly what the expert class action attorneys know about what it takes to put a class together and then bring a successful lawsuit. But here is where I land on this question. You'll never know until you try. Now, I would not want to bring a frivolous suit or one that sort of the civil laws do not allow or support, but I will leave that up to my brothers and sisters who are experts in that field to more directly answer that question. Now, here's the thing I do know. When you have issues that are viewed as largely political issues, there is this doctrine called the political question doctrine. And what that says is that the courts are generally not inclined to wade in and assume responsibility for what are ultimately political questions. I actually think we can overcome that impediment to bringing a suit in court to try to raise the rights of we, the people, to not be governed by a disqualified president, constitutionally disqualified president. I think we can overcome it by saying the Supreme Court has made it a constitutional issue and a justiciable issue. In other words, one that should be handled in the courts. Because, you know, if we, the people, cannot bring an action in court to stop being governed by a disqualified president, somebody who is constitutionally not qualified to govern, it seems to me that is something that I would hope the experts in civil litigation and class action lawsuits would consider filing.
I hope so too. I, for one, have brought a class action lawsuit and won against Donald J. Trump's campaign. But even I do not know the exact answer to that. And a lot of people who watch Lights On think I'm an attorney. I'm not actually an attorney, just a very litigious individual against the former disgraced ex-president, supposedly president-elect. But let me ask you one other question on this 14th Amendment issue. If you don't know, that's fine, but I'd love to have your thoughts. Do you think that somebody who swears Donald Trump in, Chief Justice Roberts swears Donald Trump in, and they have not cleared this hurdle of giving him amnesty, is Chief Justice Roberts violating his own oath? Is he violating the 14th Amendment, Section 3 by swearing him in?
What a great question. I would say, so first of all, if you violate the Constitution, for example, the emoluments clause, which we heard so much about, where Donald Trump was, taking, gifts or gratuities or money or exploiting his office by taking things from foreign governments, that doesn't necessarily mean you committed a crime. So just because you violate the Constitution, which is pretty darn serious, doesn't mean you're committing a crime. But it may mean you're engaged in unconstitutional conduct. It may mean that you're involved in unethical conduct that, as a lawyer, including a justice, could get you in hot water with professional responsibility associations or bar council. Of course, we know, Jessica, that the Supreme Court deems themselves above the law. They can't be bothered with these, petty little rules of ethics that govern their behavior. They're the only 9 people in government that I am aware of the 2.1 million public servants in the federal government, who get to operate ethics free, right? Which is a special kind of insanity that
Appalling.
We suffer under, and it moves us, in the direction of a banana republic. And that's the way I think the 6 justices of the Supreme Court seem to want things. But so I think if you were to administer an oath to somebody who was constitutionally disqualified from taking that oath, swearing that oath, I think you're at a minimum involved in ethical misconduct, perhaps moral misconduct, and unconstitutional conduct, I wouldn't jump right to saying you're also involved in criminal conduct, because then you'd have to be part of a conspiracy to violate a state or federal law. And I don't know that swearing somebody in who is not qualified to receive the oath would necessarily constitute a state or federal crime. But you know what? It's something that I think is worth exploring.
Yeah, I think we're really just, I said it from the first day after the election, the initial act of Donald J. Trump's presidency, if we go forward on this dangerous, reckless path, is going to be a blatant violation of the Constitution. And after that, to me, Glenn, all bets are off. All bets are off for having, adherence to the laws that uphold us.
Jessica, all bets are off, and the Supreme Court has given Donald Trump a blueprint for autocracy by giving him absolute immunity and telling him how he can use it against the American people. Do we expect Donald Trump to show self-restraint and not take advantage of the blueprint for lawlessness that the Supreme Court has given him?
I know. You're talking about blueprint for autocracy. I know you are an expert and so spot on our domestic criminal front. But if you don't mind, I want to bring in Russia for a minute, because it is no secret that Donald Trump is the chosen presidential pick of Vladimir Putin. It is no secret that we had dozens of bomb threats on election day initiating from Russian domains. Don't get me started on my questions about election anomalies. I left Meidastouch over their unwillingness to cover them and not to be gaslit about comparing us with Stop the Steal in 2020, because we have legitimate concerns. But I've now moved to focus on the 14th Amendment because I feel like that's our most solid path moving forward, and recount deadlines have passed. But this influence from Russia is not fiction. This is very, very real. And one thing that people have been suggesting, and I'm also just laser focused on whatever action can be taken right now before this man is sworn in, is that President Biden should declassify all U.S. intelligence on Trump's vulnerability to and cooperation with Vladimir Putin. This was one idea put forward by Alan Ho, writing for the Daily Kos. Many others have suggested this. What are your thoughts on whether President Biden should declassify information like that?
I'm all for it. I mean, it sounds like a good idea as long as we're not compromising sources, methods, putting folks who are loyal to us, perhaps acting in a covert capacity, at risk. I am all for it. I mean, you know, the one thing, Jessica, that it keeps me up at night and it turns my stomach is the Supreme Court gave Donald Trump and any American president who is inclined to violate our nation's laws, given him the power of lawlessness to get away with trying to steal a presidential election. Well, guess what? President Joe Biden has those same powers available to him to try to save the republic, to try to save democracy. 100%. And I would never say let's resort to violence the way Donald Trump's lawyers were arguing SEAL Team 6 should be able to go after Donald Trump's political opponents. I was in court when that argument was first being made. I do not say let's resort to that as a career prosecutor. That's not in my DNA. But there is a hell of a lot Joe Biden can do. And you just, gave us one example, declassifying information that would expose Donald Trump for, coordinating perhaps with Russia and accepting Russian assistance. This sounds familiar because that was documented in volume 1 of the Trump-Russia report by Bob Mueller, 140 contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia to help Donald Trump win. So yes, I am all for Joe Biden doing everything and anything he can do, even using the Supreme Court precedent, the power of presidential immunity to its fullest extent to try to save the republic, whereas Donald Trump tried to use it to try to end our democracy and unlawfully retain the power of the presidency.
Absolutely. I promised you we let you out, but I hope you'll answer one more question for me. In the line of adhering to the rule of law right now, I remember one of the first things that happened after the election was Elon Musk, who, as we speak, there may be, as I mentioned, this is going to air on Friday, so we may have a solution to the government's shutdown problem. But as we speak, Elon Musk has his fingers in Congress, literally pulling the strings, not a government official. South African national. Everybody's calling him President Musk, which you'll never hear me say that. But this is a man who, right after the election, met with the Iranian ambassador. Was that not a violation of the Logan Act?
So the devil's in the details when you talk about violations of the Logan Act, basically, negotiating with folks from foreign countries as if you were an American diplomat, having no authority to do that. Now, the devil's in the details when you ask the question, is it a violation of the Logan Act? Because one thing I try not to do as a former career prosecutor, is leap to the conclusion, yes, that's a crime. Because frankly, I don't decide whether things are crimes until traditionally I had investigated in the grand jury and satisfied myself that there was adequate evidence to satisfy the probable cause standard to indict or arrest somebody for a crime. It certainly looks wrong. It looks like there's enough evidence, what we call adequate predication, to investigate whether Musk is violating the Logan Act and out there negotiating with foreign governments on behalf of the United States, having no authority to do it. But the Logan Act is like one of those laws like the Hatch Act.
The Hatch Act.
Lots of folks seem to violate it, but
nobody does anything about it.
And there's no appetite to dig in and really investigate those kind of potential crimes, which is something I have mightily criticized the Department of Justice for decades, including when I was in the Department of Justice. I don't believe we go aggressively enough after the ruling class criminals, the people of power and influence and wealth and connections. When they get caught with their hand in the criminal cookie jar, what do? We let them pay a fine and back taxes and penalties. We get everything we can for the, federal treasury coffers, but we let them avoid criminal accountability and responsibility. That is one of the reasons we find ourselves where we do, because we don't hold the ruling class criminals accountable, like when judges lie to the Senate in their confirmation hearings, in their zeal, their desperate determination to become Supreme Court justices, and then do exactly what they promised under oath they wouldn't do. This is one of America's chronic failures to hold the ruling class criminals accountable. And someday we have to wrestle that to the ground and deal with it.
We absolutely have to. Glenn, thank you so much for joining me today. Before you go, is there any final note you want to leave us on?
We're going to keep looking for the points of light. Let me leave everybody with this. Donald Trump wants to put Liz Cheney in prison and Adam Kinzinger in prison and Jack Smith in prison. Not going to happen. The reason I can say with such confidence I don't believe it will happen is because he will have to run vindictive prosecutions through the federal trial court bench in Washington, D.C. That's the bench that I practiced before, and the judges on that bench are people that I tried cases with as my prosecution partners in RICO trials, that I supervised, that I know over the years because they were federal prosecutors who then became federal court judges. And what I know is they are rule of law and Constitution allegiant people. And they're not going to let Donald Trump take frivolous, baseless, vindictive prosecutions with no evidence that Liz Cheney or any of those others that I named committed any crimes and let them successfully be prosecuted. It's not going to happen. We still have bulwarks against the Trump darkness. Those are the points of light that we have to highlight and feed and support and help grow, because we're going to survive this dark period. We are.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Glenn Kirschner, host of Justice Matters. I really, really appreciate you coming to Lights On. I hope we can do this again soon.
My pleasure, Jessica.
Such a pleasure to have Glenn on Lights On. Great to hear him speak in particular about people like Jamie Raskin. And I want to address, I played, if you watched the show last week, or if you watched my interview with Caitlin Bird, I played that clip of Jamie Raskin speaking about Trump v. Anderson. And I just want to make one small clarification. I believed when I put that out that he was speaking in response to the decision in Trump v. Anderson. It was actually just prior to the decision in February of this year, after the oral argument. So I did a little more research. I found out that his comments about Congress needing to do their job to uphold Section 3 were actually made right before the decision. In the aftermath of the decision, Raskin suggested that actions should be taken by Congress, and then they would be bringing up legislation specifically to address this issue of Trump as an insurrectionist. That never happened. In the wake of the election, Raskin's office has responded to reporters with this comment, that Jamie Raskin, quote, has always remained committed to certifying the results of a free and fair election. Now, if you've been watching Lights On, you know that I and millions of Americans have many reasons to believe that there was a lot about this election that was most certainly not free and fair, starting with mass voter suppression of millions of Americans, voter purges, documented bomb threats, dozens of documented bomb threats from Russian domains on Election Day targeting Democratic precincts. Countless Americans who have notified me and others that their vote was not counted. After they voted, their status showed that their vote was not counted, was not accepted. Their voting records disappeared. Other anomalies that in organizations like Smart Elections are doing analyses of that just show strange, very, very strange patterns in the drop-off rate of votes for only the top of the ticket and not lower down on the Republican side, but not on the Democratic side. So obviously, there's so many red flags. I'm going to tell you, I've had conversations recently with people probably better connected than I am who say that they know in their conversations with these people that they all have doubts about this election being right. And I feel like that is such a crying shame with all that we knew and all of these signs. People, some of them have said, we need some actual evidence of fraud. My God Almighty, all those things that I listed, is that not evidence enough, or is that not indication enough to have just done our due diligence to request a single hand count in a single swing state? We are not the insurrectionists. We are not going to be hanging a gallows outside of the Capitol on January 6th. We were simply asking for our election hygiene, and the fact that so many people, I do believe, even in Democratic circles of, Democrats in power, have their own doubts about the legitimacy of the election, but did not have the courage to come forward and support the people in our demands for due diligence, and all the media, the pro-democracy media that has told us for so long that they're on our side. What a shame. What a crying, crying shame. And some of you have asked me why I haven't spent more time on the election anomaly issue or the recount issue or the analyses that organizations like Smart Elections are doing. It's because we are outside of the window where it can have any impact. The Electoral College voted this week. I will note that somewhere around a dozen fake electors, people who are under criminal indictment for trying to submit false certificates in 2020, were among those casting votes in this year's Electoral College. But the fact of the matter is that we are outside of the window of asking for recounts. So that is why I have shifted so much of my attention and my focus to the constitutional issue. First, if we had gotten to the threshold of, wait a minute, this man wasn't really elected, well, that would have saved us this conversation, wouldn't it have? But it didn't, unfortunately. And so now we are at the point where we have to enforce our Constitution. And going back to Jamie Raskin, I sure hope, I think he has it in him. I think a lot more Democrats have it in them to get to their core, and not be afraid of optics. I'm going to put another image up. This is January 6th. Look at literally our Capitol flames, tear gas, police officers being beat with flagpoles, some of them nearly losing their lives. Brian Sicknick did lose his life. Donald Trump sent his own supporters to their death that day. Multiple Capitol police officers and Metropolitan police officers took their lives in the aftermath of this day. This is not us. This is not us. We can raise legitimate concerns on January 6th. Our lawmakers can raise the objections. This is the day, just like we're not going to let MAGA gaslight us on election hygiene. We're not going to let them gaslight us on the true function of January 6th, which is to have peaceful debate about whether votes have been cast properly. I'm going to read from a Politico article that I read on my interview the other day with Evan Bernick. It says, when Congress meets on January 6th to count electoral votes, lawmakers are largely bound to accept the state certified results. But federal law gives Congress the power to challenge the validity of electors they deem not regularly given. A federal appeals court judge recently opined that a candidate ineligible to hold office under the insurrection clause would be a valid basis for Congress to reject presidential electors in January. And that is exactly the case with Donald Trump. He remains, for all of the reasons that I have been explaining with scholars and others on this show, he remains constitutionally disqualified. And so it is really incumbent on us to put as much pressure as possible on them in peaceful ways. We are not the image that I just had up on that screen. We are using the real function of January 6th to raise legitimate concerns. And frankly, it should be done well before then. That's why I've been talking about why we should be bringing an amnesty bill. I want to kind of turn to Meidastouch for a minute. I know they've been putting out a lot of messaging to try to make you feel like they're not like the rest of the media, like they always do. I'm going to put just one set of comments up on the stage. This is about in reaction to them saying they won't be silenced. I think this was after that despicable payment of $16 million from ABC to Donald Trump for a defamation case that they would have certainly won, that Donald Trump had no legal standing on whatsoever. And Meidastouch is trying to distance themselves from ABC and say, they're not scared. They're not scared. These are just some comments saying that it appears that they are afraid of being sued because of the way that they didn't want me to discuss election anomalies or have a conversation about due diligence and just automatically dismiss all of these claims. There's another comment about why they talk about being independent and there's no big bro dictating as to what they can say. And yet they were very clear with me about what could and could not be said in the aftermath of the election. And it's been interesting, but not surprising to see that they have likewise tried to shut down the conversation on Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And I pointed out some misinformation last week on the Legal AF channel, and one of you pointed me to another source of misinformation that it's just unexcusable. I know these lawyers know better than this. This is from Michael Popak on apparently a short live show he did. And I'm just reading from the transcript. He said, he's saying that Section 3 is not self-executing. You can't just file a lawsuit and make it happen. And this Congress, let's be frank, this Congress, there's no 2/3 of anything. And that's how much would have to be in order to get Donald Trump not to be seated into the presidency or to find that he has a disability in the form of being an insurrectionist. Now, I have a hard time believing that he actually thinks that, but that is factually the opposite of what Section 3 says. Section 3 says for insurrectionists, Congress may be, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. I feel like I've been reiterating this in every show since I heard that because the misunderstanding out there is so vast. And to have a platform like Meidastouch with their millions of followers amplifying it is just a crying shame. By the way, a lot of questions out there. Did he have to be charged with insurrection, convicted of a crime? No. I had so many conversations about this subject with legal scholars in the lead up to that case. There never had to be criminal charges or a conviction. So this is a separate, it could be adjudicated in any way, and it was adjudicated. The facts were established up and through the Colorado Supreme Court. That is the status of Donald Trump, constitutionally barred insurrectionist. That can be removed. That disability can be removed by a 2/3 vote. A 2/3 vote is not required by Congress to affirm it. Just make sure everybody has that crystal clear. So that remains, that's why we've been raising the suggestion of bringing an amnesty bill, because an amnesty bill would almost certainly fail, because that 2/3 vote is such a high threshold to reach, as Michael Popak states, but for the incorrect reason, applying the incorrect logic and factual misinformation about Section 3. And so failure of an amnesty bill on any level would be a success in affirming that Donald J. Trump is in fact disqualified. And it would simply serve to bring the conversation to the forefront. And it could be done well before January 6th. So I'm going to share just a few more comments from you. Here's one talking again to Meidastouch. It's his reference to a conversation that Ben Meiselas had with President Biden, where he apparently didn't ask about the 14th Amendment. It says, shame on you for not asking about the 14th Amendment. You had the opportunity of a lifetime. You let us down. You should believe in us to help get the information on the 14th Amendment to the public. I just want to make one other comment before I move on from Meidastouch about something that I think I was influenced to engage in while I was part of that network. And if you're familiar with their coverage, especially before the election, there was so much, this is basically their network is attacking the personality of Trump. Okay, they did spend a lot of time talking about his bodily functions, something that I would never touch with a 10-foot pole. But I did buy into, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, when you're part of something, you are obviously influenced by it. And I bought into this obsession with Trump's personality and the obsession with personal attacks on the man. And it's actually very counter to the way I operate, because the way that I have my spiritual upbringing, the way that I have learned to be successful in anything, and the way to live is to not address things through personal attacks, but to address them through principle. And I have a lot of thoughts about Donald Trump. I think he's a very sad individual who's been given this pretense of power by really a lot of people who just want their own power. And so they've propped him up. Just look at the people that surround him. Very sad and lonely individual. But we don't have to focus on the personality of the man. And ultimately, it hasn't really gotten us anywhere, has it? We have to focus on principle, on law, on what is right and what is wrong. And right now, we have a clear line of demarcation between the actions of this man, the lawless actions of him that he has taken, and what he is allowed to do under our constitutional order. And assuming the presidency is not one of those things. So I want to thank you all for really being so engaged in this conversation about Section 3, for being so unwilling to let the Constitution die on our watch. One other comment says, love lights on. We need straight talk, not truth twisted into a pretzel that is half-baked. America is traumatized by lack of truth and action by this criminal and his posse that protects him. I'm going to read just briefly before I give you my request for your assistance from a letter that somebody posted in the comments. It's a long letter to President Biden, but it says, I'm just reading a portion. It says, it is my fear, and you know that I am not alone, that should Trump be permitted to take office, he will, as he has already begun to do, sell the USA to the highest bidder, who will then override his weak and unqualified impotency to run the country as a soft dictatorship for who knows how many decades. What has been a shining beacon of democracy for over 2.5 centuries will become a chaotic shambles and the tool of every despotic regime and billionaire that can curry favor with its government. until the overwhelming levels of corruption will eventually bring it down, making our Constitution merely a footnote in history instead of the shining example it has been for so many years. We must not forget how terribly its citizens will suffer when those who will not accept the status quo are forced to comply. And then he asks President Biden to please use any power within his authority, as Glenn was suggesting in our interview, to stop this madness, to do anything he possibly can to preserve our democracy before he leaves office. Be bold. Use that insane 20 seconds of courage that is going to produce beautiful, beautiful results. So listen, my friends, here's where we are. I know you have been sending so many suggestions my way. One of the earliest suggestions, and one till this point, is that there has to be some kind of presence, some kind of protest in DC to show that the people are not going to stand for this. I know there's some protests organized for January 18th, a little bit late. Election is certified on January 6th. I am not averse to being involved in one of these protests, but the fact of the matter is that I need help. I have limited bandwidth. I do not have the organizational or logistical capacity to do this on my own. So at the risk of being inundated, and I'm going to ask you to please not, please only, my friends, if you have the bandwidth, if you have the ability and the resources to help me on a practical level, and I need help on a few practical levels, you can contact me at contact@thejessicadenson.com. Contact@thejessicadenson.com. Again, I need somebody with resources. I need practical assistance, logistical help. Please, as I said, if you don't have that, it's okay. I understand, and we're going to get everybody as involved as we can if I'm able to be part of something like this. But right now, I specifically need practical help to make it happen if we can. And I understand we have a very, very short window of time. I'm thinking of something that would have to happen before January 6th. I don't even think that waiting until the day of certification is what we should do. But that is my request. I want to thank everybody so much for being a part of this movement. This really is a movement. It really is a refusal to let democracy die on our watch, and the love and the light and the joy that has been put in to that fight is such a beautiful thing to see, especially right now in this season of light. This may be the last episode before Christmas, so I want to tell everybody Merry Christmas, happy season of light to everyone out there, especially those who are suffering in places like Gaza and Sudan, Ukraine, Israeli hostages, all of the people going through unthinkable conditions around the world. I'm really thinking of them, thinking of anybody who might be alone this holiday, and thinking of this precious democracy of ours that so much has been sacrificed for, that we are not willing to let die on our watch. So thank you so much for being part of this with me. Please, please subscribe to the Jessica Denson YouTube channel. Please share this channel and this video and my other videos on the 14th Amendment with others. There are calls to action. There are petitions you can sign, congressmen you can contact. All of the instructions are in those videos. So please, please check them out and share them. And please, if you can support my work at thejessicadenson.com/donate. thejessicadenson.com/donate. I so greatly appreciate it. I am completely independent right now. And unlike some other, so-called pro-democracy media who went into this as multimillionaires, that is not who I am. So I thank you so much for your support. And by the way, if you're struggling yourself, you keep your money. But if you have it, if you're able to support me, it is so, so much appreciated. And the other thing you can do is order merch at thejessicadenson.com. There's a link to my merch store where we have hats, shirts, and a mug that I recently updated to say stand out. So you can buy merch there, and I really, really appreciate your support in every way possible. Once again, Merry Christmas. Let's get a movement together before January 6th to stop this. I love you all so much, and let your light shine.